Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about the 2008 Russian historical epic Alexander the Warrior Saint, which you can also find under the title of just Alexander, presumably because confusion with the Oliver Stone film of that name would be no bad thing for the film's prospects with Western audiences. In this case, however, the titular Alexander is Alexander Nevsky, one of Russia's great national heroes, the leader who defeated the invasion of the Teutonic Knights and ensured that the Russian people remained in the Orthodox rather than Catholic faith. His battle with the knightly order was the subject of Sergei Eisenstein's 1938 film Alexander Nevsky, which is widely regarded as one of the great works of Soviet cinema. Now, this is obviously not that movie. It was made 70 years later, for one thing. Instead, it focuses on the events that happened a couple of years earlier in history, and that led to Alexander getting the surname Nevsky, because when we meet Alexander in this film, the year is 1240, and he is still known as Alexander Yaroslavich. Alexander is the Prince of Novgorod, a historical state located just to the east of modern-day Estonia and Latvia. Alexander and his subjects are Orthodox Christians, which frequently puts them at odds with their Western neighbours who follow the Catholic faith. In this case, the neighbours in question are the Swedes, who have just completed a successful crusade against pagans in the southern parts of Finland, and now have forces threatening Novgorod. Now, as I said, the people of Novgorod are Christian, but they are not Catholic, which makes them fair game for conquest and conversion in the eyes of the Western Church. Now, this threat comes at a difficult time for Alexander. He is also threatened from another direction as well. The powerful Mongol Empire is at his gates. Unlike the Swedes, however, the Mongols don't care what faith the Russian people follow, as long as they pay their tribute. For the devout Alexander, the answer is clear. He must bow to Mongol demands in order to shepherd the souls of his people. But there are powerful factions in his realm who disagree, and the young prince will be faced with treason and treachery before he can cross swords with the Swedes in open warfare. Now, I don't think it's really a spoiler to tell you that Alexander wins through in the end, defeating the Swedish forces at the Battle of the Neva River, in the process earning himself the name by which he has become known to history, because, this did happen nearly 800 years ago. So apparently the film was produced by the Russian Board of Culture as an educational historical film, so financial performance probably wasn't the primary metric for its success, which is just as well, since I can't find any info on what it cost, though it looks like it was a fairly small budget, or what it made at the box office. I encountered the film on DVD back around 2013 as part of a trio of films that have been packaged together in a medieval epics box set, which is something as a misnomer, as one of the other films was set in the 17th century, which is roughly 200 years after the medieval period is generally agreed to have ended, but never mind. Of the three films, I enjoyed this one the most, though that's not saying much, as I really did not rate the other two very highly. But we're not here to talk about the other two films, so let's dig into some of the specifics of this movie, shall we? And to start with a positive, the film does seem to have been carefully and thoughtfully produced. While the budget wasn't lavish, it appears to have been employed efficiently. The film's sets and costumes are good, and I'm pleased to see that the director chose to keep things on a smaller scale wherever possible, rather than resort to CGI to try and scale up battle scenes and the like. Few things jar me out of a movie as quickly and as effectively as cheap CGI. I find it much more intrusive than cheap practical effects. This film avoids that trap. The acting also seems solid. Now, obviously, I watched the film in Russian with subtitles, so it's difficult to judge the performances in detail, but line delivery seemed smooth and competent, and the body language and verbal tone came across well. For instance, there was a scene between two of Nevsky's enemies, a father and son, that communicated complex emotions quite effectively, even while reading subtitles to understand the actual words being spoken. Now, there is an English language dub available, I believe, but reports are that it is poorly executed. So, as always with non-English films, I recommend that if you do see it, you see it in the original language with subtitles rather than dubbed. I just generally think the experience is better. Unfortunately, not every part of the production works quite so well. In particular, I do think things are a bit uneven script-wise. There are some good elements, the scene I mentioned above, for instance, and the fact that Alexander is allowed to make mistakes, but also some more dubious ones. For instance, the film employs both opening and closing narration, the former to set the scene and the latter to encapsulate some of Nevsky's legacy. For me, both passages clunked quite badly, at least when reading them as subtitles as the narration is spoken. Perhaps they work better if you understand them in the original Russian. There's also a bit of a lightweight romantic triangle subplot involving Alexander's best friend falling for Alexander's wife, which smacked pretty heavily of Lancelot and Guinevere vibes, and to me felt rather wedged in and underdeveloped. Finally, I felt that the action sequences had a number of jarring tone shifts from comical to dramatic, and that sometimes there were elements that were supposed to be dramatic but came across more comical. There's nothing as outright laughable as the climax of Barbarossa, a film I talked about back in December 2022, and which was in this same DVD 3-pack. But still, this film does occasionally feel a bit unintentionally goofy in its battle scenes. Now, as I said earlier, the movie was produced by the Russian Board of Culture, so it's no real surprise that the tone of the film is highly patriotic and has a hagiographic reverence for Alexander Nevsky, who is a colossal figure in the Russian national identity. So much so that in a national poll in 2008, the year this came out, he was named the greatest hero in Russian history. This is particularly relevant because while the Battle of the Neva is a potent symbol of Russian national pride, it is also a battle that goes completely unmentioned by Swedish sources of the time. Most Western historians believe that the most likely explanation for this is that from the side of the Swedes, this battle wasn't anything more than a typical border skirmish. It wasn't a planned invasion, it was just a bit of a scrap on the border. Alternatively, the explanation might be that as Sweden was racked with internal strife at the time, the incursion was an independent action by one or more Swedish lords rather than invasion organised and approved by the Swedish state government, and therefore that's why the Swedish records don't talk about it at all. Nonetheless, overall, this isn't a bad film, but it's also probably not good enough that I can really recommend it unless you have a passion for medieval period pieces or for movies that deal with events and viewpoints from outside the scope of the usual Western sources. Next time, when Gareth Edwards wrote and directed the science fiction horror film Monsters in 2010, it launched his career into a completely different level of the industry. He's gone on to helm movies like Godzilla, Star Wars, and Jurassic World franchises. So, let's talk about the movie that got him there. But that is next time. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you've seen Alexander the Warrior Saint, let me know what you thought of it.